They say the river can be bone-chillingly cold, but no cold compares to the emptiness in the eyes of a child you carried. That kind of cold doesn't just seep into your bones, it freezes your heart solid. I learned that on the day my own flesh and blood conspired to end my life, pushing me into the indifferent water. This is a true story, not about the battle against the current, but about surviving a truth more chilling than the coldest river. If you are listening from anywhere in the world, leave a comment and subscribe, because some truths need to be spread, even if they might shake your beliefs. Some stories, no matter how painful, must be told. It's funny how a single face can reel in the years like a fishing line. Seeing Daniel stumble away in fear doesn't just remind me of the attack. It reminds me of everything that led to it, and everything that came after. It reminds me of a life shaped by this river, a life that began long before he ever entered it. It began in a small shack in Tucson, with a father who understood the water's soul. My whole life, I'd been a daughter of the river. It was my father who taught me to respect it, but never to be afraid of it. I never imagined that the real danger wasn't the water, but the people you share a boat with. My name is Eleanor Marie Waters, but everyone around here knows me as Ellie. I've got 83 years on my back. Every one of them marked with sun and sand, just as it should be for someone born the daughter of a river guide in Tucson, right there at the end of the canyon. Today I live in this simple cabin here in Lake Havasu City, facing the Colorado River that tried to take me once, but ended up returning me stronger. The neighbors call me the old lady who beat the river, and I let them, because I did, swimming for miles with these legs and arms that can barely handle the steps from the beach now, but that on that day found a strength I didn't even know I had. My father had a waterproof watch he'd bought from a foreign sailor, the kind that could handle even a deep dive. The day they shoved me off the boat, the first thing I did when I hit the water was look at it. Is it working? I thought. Then I'm going to work too. I wasn't going to let the last piece of my father sink with me. My father taught me to respect the river, but never to fear it. And in that moment, I understood that letting the fear, or the cruelty of others, pull you under. Well, that's the only real failure. The watch was still running, and so was I. Tucson, where I was born, is one of those places where time seems to slow down. A small town on the canyon rim, surrounded by arid ground and canyons on all sides, a land of river guides, of people who wake up before the sun and only return when their boat is full or the sky threatens to turn. It was there that my father taught me to respect the river, but never to be afraid of it. Anyone who's afraid, Ellie, has already lost before they start, he used to say. And I, a little girl, absorbed every word as if it were the absolute truth of the world. And it was. I learned to swim before I could walk right. My mother died giving birth to me, so I was raised by my father and the rest of the river guide community. The other women would take care of me when he went out on the river, but as soon as I got a little bigger, I'd go with him. I was the only girl among all those men, but nobody treated me differently. On the river, what matters is if you know what you're doing, not what you've got between your legs. Looking at this cabin now, no one would say it was bought with guiding money. It's no palace, but it has a river view that even millionaires can't buy. From here I can tell when the weather will change, when the water level will rise, when the fish will start running. I don't need a cell phone app or a television forecast. The river talks to me, and I still know how to listen, even after all these years. That Daniel fellow, when he showed up in my daughter Charlotte's life, he already had his eye on this little piece of land, a real estate agent, one of those who talks soft and thinks hard. I saw right away he was no good. But who am I to say who my daughter should or shouldn't marry? She was already 35 years old. She was past the age for taking motherly advice. At least that's what she told me when I tried to warn her. Mom, are you jealous? Daniel loves me. He only wants the best for the two of us. Oh, if only I had known what best meant. I've seen a lot from this porch. I've seen a storm rip the roof off a house. I've seen boats capsize and guides not come back. But never, until that day, had I seen my own daughter's look change from concern to disappointment when she realized I had survived. That leaves a mark on a mother, a deeper mark than a wrinkle or a scar. On the day I fell off the boat, or rather, on the day they shoved me off the boat, the river was calm, as I've rarely seen it. Clear sky, not a cloud in sight, water blue and transparent. A perfect day to die, they must have thought. Perfect, because no one would suspect a thing. An old woman of 74 who fell off a boat by accident. Who would survive? Especially when the boat speeds away quickly, pretending not to see. They just weren't counting on one thing. I spent my whole life on the river. I can read the currents like an open book. I know how to swim against the current when I need to. The other river guides here in Lake Havasu City respect me. Not for being old. There are a lot of old people out there who aren't worth the fish they eat, but because they know my story. They know I'm one of those people the river returned because it wanted to. Old Ellie has a pact with the spirits of the canyon, they say. I don't know if I have a pact, but I have respect. My father taught me that the river doesn't give you anything for free. If it let me come back that day, it was because it recognized an equal in me. When I remember Daniel's face today, all scared in front of me, I almost want to laugh. Almost, because along with it comes the memory of my Charlotte, my only daughter, who would rather see me dead than have to wait for the inheritance. How does a mother process that? How do you understand that the child who came out of you, who you breastfed, who you taught to walk, who you protected from everything and everyone, wanted to end you? There's no explanation for it. There's no forgiveness for it. Or maybe there is. I'm still deciding. This view I have from here is priceless. The buildings growing all around and swallowing up small cabins like mine, but they haven't reached here yet. Daniel offered me an apartment once, one of those tiny ones in a complex building. You'll like it, Eleanor. It has an elevator, a doorman. You won't have to climb the stairs. What he didn't understand is that I need to see the river when I wake up. I need to feel the hot, dry wind, to hear the water breaking on the shore. Away from this, I'd shrivel up like a plant without water. This watch on my wrist seems to still hold a bit of my father. Sometimes, on the most difficult days, I look at it and feel like someone is with me. That day on the river, as I swam with all the strength I had, it was as if the hand of the clock was a compass guiding me back home. Every tick-tock told me, don't give up, don't give up. And I didn't. The lights of the harbor up there were my salvation. I saw them from far away, a tiny bright spot, and I focused on it. Each stroke brought me a little closer. Everything hurt. My muscles burned. The salt stung my eyes, but I never took my eyes off that lookout. I don't know how long it took. The clock marks the hours, but when you're fighting for your life, time becomes something else. The old folks say the river punishes you, but it also teaches you. It taught me, at least, that you should never underestimate what seems weak. It taught me that strength isn't in the size of your muscle, but in the size of your will. It taught me that sometimes the longest path is the only one that takes you home. By then, it had been many years since I had been a guide. I had quit when I retired at 60. My body couldn't handle the boat's rocking, the weight of the ropes, the cold of the early mornings anymore, but the knowledge was still inside. The river doesn't leave someone who was born in it, you understand? You can take the guide away from the river, but you can't take the river out of the guide. Now I'm here, 83 years on my back, watching the same river that almost took me, watching tour boats pass just like the one I saw before Daniel showed up today. Life is funny. It goes around in circles you can't even imagine. Who would have thought that I, a simple daughter of a river guide from Tusayan, a woman without an education, without wealth, without anything but the knowledge of the waters, would survive all of that to tell the story? But I did, and I'm here. And as long as I have the strength to sit on this porch and look at the horizon, I'll keep going. I was born in Tusayan, right at the end of the canyon in 1942, in a wooden shack that the wind would shake every time a storm hit. It was so small and so close to the water that when the river rose too high, we had to put the furniture on top of bricks so it wouldn't get wet. My father, Joe the guide, nobody called him by his real name, which was Joseph Henry, was the most respected guide in the region. He knew every rock, every sandbar, every hole where the fish hid. My mother, Linda, I never even got to know. She died giving birth to me, as they say. The birth was difficult, long, and in those days there wasn't a doctor nearby, just a midwife. When I was finally born, She had already lost so much blood that there was no way. My father said she still had the strength to hold me in her arms once, look me in the eyes, and say my name. Eleanor, so you'll never forget that you came from the river. Then she closed her eyes and never opened them again. In the photos my father kept, she looked like a beautiful young woman, with straight, black hair and a round face, always smiling. Sometimes I wonder what it would have been like to grow up with her nearby. Without a mother, I was raised by my father and the other women in the community. That's how it was back then. Everyone looked after everyone. In the morning, my father would leave me with Patricia while he went out on the river. When he came back, I had already eaten lunch, played, and learned something new. The next day, it might be at Sarah's house or Karen's house, who wasn't my blood aunt, but everyone called her that. Each one taught me a little of what she knew: how to cook fish, mend ropes, braid grass, tell stories. But what I really loved was when my father took me with him. I don't even know exactly how old I was when I started going out on the river. So young that I don't remember the first time. My father would tie me with a rope around my waist, attached to the boat, so I wouldn't fall in the water while he was guiding. And I would stay there, watching him drop the rope, pull it in, separate the fish with those enormous calloused hands. It was during those mornings, on the rocking of the boat, that I learned that the river isn't just water, it's a living being, that it breathes, that it has moods, that it talks to anyone who knows how to listen. I learned to swim even before I could walk properly. My father would throw me into the shallow water and say, "Ellie, come here." At first I would flail, swallow water, cry, but I soon got the hang of it. By the time I was 3, I was swimming like a little fish. By 5, I was already diving to the bottom to get shells. By 7, I was already accompanying my father on longer trips, helping to pull the lighter nets, to separate the fish, to clean them. The other children would play with dolls, with balls, with hide and seek. I played at being a guide. The shack we lived in was simple, but we never lacked food. We would eat a little of what my father caught and sell the rest. He wasn't a man to drink, to gamble, or to spend money foolishly. He would save every penny he had left over in a can hidden under the floorboards. "For you to go to school, Ellie," he would say. "For you to have a better life than mine." But I didn't want a better life. I wanted that life, right there on the rocking of the boat, with the smell of fish, on the endless horizon. When I was about 10, my father gave me my first guide's knife, a small one, but sharp as could be. "You're a big girl now, Ellie," he said. "You can clean your own fish." It was more than a knife. It was a recognition. In the community, everyone knew. Jo the guide's daughter wasn't a little girl anymore. She was an apprentice guide. It was around that time that I got my first nickname, Fish Girl. The other children said I spent so much time in the water that I was growing gills. I didn't mind. In fact, I liked it. Because a fish is a clever creature, a fast creature, a creature that knows where it's going. And I wanted to be like that too. Everything changed when I was 12. It was on a Wednesday. I remember it like it was yesterday. The sky dawned strange, a little greenish around the edges. My father looked up, sniffed the air like a dog scenting something, and said, "Ellie, we're not going out today. The weather's no good." But then Gary, a kind of new guide in the area, came along, saying he had seen an enormous school of bass passing near Indian Pass. He insisted and insisted until my father gave in. "All right, let's go." But the girl stays. Of course I threw a fit. I wanted to go with him as I always did. "But Dad, I always help you. Why can't I today?" He got serious, which was rare. "Because the river's not good today, Ellie, and you are going to obey me." That scared me. My father never talked like that, so harshly. So I sulked at Patricia's house, looking out the window as their boat shrank on the horizon. What happened next? I only know from what the other guides told me. The weather turned suddenly, which sometimes happens on the river. The sky darkened, the wind picked up, the rain poured down. The waves grew so big they looked like mountains of water. Gary's and my father's boat, too small for that wild river, couldn't handle it. It capsized. When the other guides arrived at the site, they only found pieces of the boat floating. Of Gary, no sign at all. Of my father, only his waterproof watch, stuck to a piece of wood, the very one I carry to this day. They searched for days with every boat in the area, but the river, when it takes, doesn't always give back. I was an orphan at 12, without a mother, without a father, with only the river as my family. At just 12 years old, the very river that had been her playground became the source of her deepest sorrow. This single moment of heartbreak would forge a resilience in Eleanor that no one could have ever imagined. Keep listening to discover how the orphan of the river begins to carve her own path. The people in the community got together to decide what to do with me. There was an aunt in Phoenix who could take me, or I could go to the orphanage in Chandler, but I didn't want to leave Tucson. That was my place. There, I knew every corner, every person, every movement of the water. It was Patricia who settled the matter. "The girl is staying with me," she announced without asking anyone's permission. "She's already used to my house, and I'm used to her. I've raised my own kids. I know how to do it." And so it was. I moved into her house, a little bigger than ours, a little farther from the water, but still with a river view. For the first few days, I couldn't even look at the river. I was angry at it for having taken my father, but I soon understood that it hadn't been the river's fault. It had been the wind, the rain, the storm, and maybe a little of Gary's stubbornness that insisted on going out that day. The river just did what it always does. It moved according to its nature. With time, the pain lessened, but it never completely disappeared. I still miss my father every single day, but I learned to turn that pain into strength, into knowledge. I started to study the river more deeply, the currents, the tides, the winds, the signs of a storm, everything my father had taught me and more, what I learned on my own or from the older guides. By the time I was 15, I knew as much as any adult guide. I knew every rock, every sandbar, every hole where the fish hid, just like my father. I could look at the sky and tell if it was going to rain, look at the water and tell if the tide was going to rise. It was as if the river was talking to me, telling me its secrets. When I turned 18, I announced, "I'm going to be a guide, not an apprentice, not a helper. A real guide, with my own boat, my own nets, with everything." People laughed. "Women aren't guides," they said. "Women stay on land, they clean the fish, sell them at the market. The river is a man's place." Not even my adopted mother, Patricia, supported me at first. "Girl, this is no life for a young lady. How are you going to get married like this? What man would want a woman who smells like fish?" But I had inherited my father's stubbornness, and I had the can with the money he had saved his whole life, which Patricia gave me when I came to her house. "This is yours," she said. "Your father wanted you to go to school, but if you're not going to school, at least use it for something good." And I did. I bought an old boat that was already almost retired. I fixed it up with the help of Patrick, a carpenter who was a friend of my father's. I bought used, nets, hooks, bait, everything I needed. The first day I went out on the river alone. Everyone went to the edge of the water to watch. There were even bets going on. How long would it take for me to come back crying? An hour? 2? Would I even be able to get out of the cove? I left while it was still dark, rowing slowly, feeling the wind on my face, the familiar rocking of the boat. I went to the same places I used to go with my father. I cast the net the same way he taught me, and I waited. When I came back, it was almost night. The boat was so full of fish I could barely row properly. I stopped in front of everyone who was still there waiting, unloaded my catch, and didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The pile of bass and trout spoke for me. With one magnificent catch, Ellie silenced a town full of doubters without saying a single word. She had earned her place on the water, but life has a way of testing even the strongest among us. Her greatest challenge, however, wouldn't come from the river, but from something much closer to home. From that day on, no one doubted me anymore. There were still those who didn't like it, who thought it was wrong, who talked behind my back. But to my face it was, "Good morning, Ellie. Good catch, Ellie. How's the weather today, Ellie?" I had earned my place, not for being a woman, not for being Joe the guide's daughter, but for being good at what I did. The years went by, and I got better and better. I had a special way of understanding the river that even the most experienced guides didn't have. I can't explain it. It was like a sixth sense. I knew where the fish would be, the right time to cast the net, when the weather would turn. The other guides even started asking for advice. "Ellie, do you think we can go out tomorrow? Ellie, where are the most fish this week?" I was the first female guide in Tusayan, but I wasn't the last. Soon, other young women started looking for me, wanting to learn. At first, they were just the ones who had no other option. Widows, orphans, women who needed to make their own way. Later, others came who simply loved the river, like me. I taught everyone who came to me. Some gave up quickly. They couldn't handle the hardship. Others stuck with it and became good guides, too. By the time I was 30, I already had a bigger boat, a loyal clientele that bought only from me, and some money saved up. But Tusayan was getting too small. The fish weren't as plentiful as they used to be. The competition was increasing, and I wanted to see other places, other rivers. That's when I heard about a guide in Lake Havasu City who was selling his spot on the Parker Strip. He had a good boat, a small cabin near the water, and a guaranteed clientele. I didn't think twice. The move wasn't easy, leaving the town where I was born, the people I had known my whole life, even the river, which was almost a friend, but I felt like I needed to go. It was as if the river itself was telling me, "Eleanor, there's more for you to see. There's more life ahead." I arrived in Lake Havasu City on a day of fine drizzle, the kind that barely feels like rain. The cabin I bought was smaller than the one in Tusayan, more simple, but it had a breathtaking view. From there I could see the Parker Strip on one side and the open river on the other. I could see the boats coming in and out of the main harbor, the tour boats, the guides like me. In Lake Havasu City, the guiding was different. The river was choppier, the currents were stronger, the fish were different kinds. But I soon got the hang of it and had an idea that no one else had had yet, selling the fish directly on the beach to tourists. I would set up a little table, clean the fish right there, and sell them for double the price I could get at the market. On weekends, when the beach filled with people from Phoenix, a line would even form. It was while selling fish on the Parker Strip that I met Walter. He owned a general store nearby and would always stop by to buy fresh fish for lunch. At first, it was just good morning, good afternoon, but then it turned into longer conversations, until one day he invited me to dinner at his house. I, who had never cared much about dating or marriage, accepted more out of politeness than interest. I was 35, already well settled with my single life. But Walter was different from the other men who had been interested in me over the years. He wasn't bothered by my smell of fish, by my calloused hands, by my somewhat rough way of speaking. He liked to listen to my stories about the river, about what life was like in Tusayan, about the storms I had faced. And most importantly, he respected me as a guide. He never tried to pull me away from the river, like others had. We got married 6 months after we started dating, a simple ceremony at the little chapel in Lake Havasu City, with just a few friends and neighbors. I didn't have any family left. Patricia had died a few years earlier. Married life didn't change my routine much. I continued going out on the river at dawn, coming back with a full boat, selling on the beach. The difference was that now I had someone waiting for me at home, someone to talk to at the end of the day, someone to share my life with. At 37, when I wasn't even thinking about it anymore, I got pregnant. It was a big surprise. The doctor said it was a high-risk pregnancy because of my age. In those days, 37 was already considered old for a first pregnancy. He told me to rest, not to overexert myself, not even to think about getting in the boat. They were the most difficult 9 months of my life. I, accustomed to the freedom of the river, was stuck at home, watching the water from the window without being able to touch it. Charlotte was born on a stormy afternoon. A difficult, long birth, just like mine. For a moment, I was afraid I would meet the same fate as my mother, that I would leave my daughter an orphan like I had been, but I held on tight. When they finally put that crying bundle in my arms, I knew it had been worth it. She was a beautiful, perfect little girl, with her father's eyes and, they said, my stubborn chin. I went back to guiding 2 weeks after the birth. I would leave the baby with a neighbor, or sometimes Walter himself would take care of her when the general store was less busy. It wasn't the perfect arrangement, but it worked. I loved my daughter more than anything, but I also loved the river, and I needed both in my life. Charlotte grew up listening to the sound of the water as a lullaby. Her first steps were in the sand on the beach, her first games with shells and rocks that I brought for her. I tried to teach her to be a guide like my father taught me, but she never had much interest. She preferred to stay at the general store with her father, helping to serve customers, count money, and organize the shelves. She had a good head for numbers, for business, but not for the river. Life was going on its quiet course until Walter got sick. It started with a cough that wouldn't go away, then came shortness of breath, weakness. When he finally went to the doctor in Scottsdale, it was already too late. Lung cancer, the kind that spreads fast. In 6 months, he was gone. I was 50, Charlotte was 13. The blow was immense. Walter wasn't just my husband, my companion. He was my daughter's father, the man who took care of the house when I was on the river, who helped me sell the fish when there were a lot of customers. Suddenly, everything was on my shoulders. The guiding, the selling, and raising Charlotte, the bills to pay. But I had faced worse things. I rolled up my sleeves and went on. I guided more, I worked more, I slept less, I did what needed to be done. Charlotte helped as much as she could, taking on household chores, studying hard so she wouldn't give me any trouble. She was a good girl, studious, responsible, sometimes too serious for her age. I think she grew up faster after her father died. When she finished high school, she wanted to go to college, to study business administration in Scottsdale. She would go and come back every day by bus. I paid for it as best as I could, selling more fish, saving money on other things, using some of the money that Walter had left saved up. I wanted her to have what I didn't have: an education, a diploma, a chance to work without having to break her body like I broke mine. And she succeeded. She graduated, got a job in an office in the city, then at a bigger company downtown. She was doing well, earning her own money, building her life. I continued guiding, but it wasn't the same. My body was starting to complain. Back pain, joint pain, tiredness that a night's sleep couldn't fix. The river is generous, but it demands its price. At 60, I decided it was time to stop. I sold the boat, put away the nets, hung up my boots. It wasn't an easy decision. The river had been my whole life, my livelihood, my place in the world, but I knew how to recognize when it was time to change course. The retirement pay of a guide wasn't much, but it was enough for the basics. And I had saved over the years. I owned my cabin outright. I didn't owe anything to anyone. It was around this time that Charlotte met Daniel. She was 35, he was about 40, a real estate agent from the city, handsome, talkative. At first, I didn't like him very much. He had an artificial, forced way about him, as if he was always selling something, even when he wasn't. But Charlotte seemed to be in love. And who was I to say no? They dated for a few years, then got engaged, and finally got married. The ceremony was much bigger than mine had been. A full church, a party with a caterer, a photographer, everything you could imagine. Daniel made a point of showing he could afford it. They bought an apartment in Scottsdale, small but well located. Charlotte continued working, now at an accounting firm. They seemed to be doing well, to be happy. I stayed in my little cabin in Lake Havasu City, alone now. I no longer guided, but I went to look at the river every day. I'd greet the guides who went out at dawn, like I used to. Sometimes I would give advice when they asked me about the weather, about where to find a certain fish. I had become a kind of local oracle. If Ellie says it's going to rain, you can bet it's going to rain. Charlotte and Daniel would come visit me from time to time, usually on the weekend. At first, they were normal visits, lunch, conversation. Sometimes they would stay the night. But with time, I noticed that Daniel would look at the cabin a lot, measuring it with his eyes, evaluating it. Once he even asked me how much I thought the land was worth. I don't know, I answered. I've never thought about selling. That's when the hints started. Eleanor, don't you think this cabin is too big for just you? Eleanor, this place is getting dangerous. There are a lot of break-ins on the beach. Eleanor, climbing this hill every day must be hard at your age. Always with that commercial smile, that soft voice that didn't fool me. I would always answer the same thing. Daniel, I'm fine here. This cabin is my whole life. I'm only leaving when I go to the cemetery. In the beginning, that would make him back off, but he would soon come back with another conversation, another angle. He was persistent. I can't deny that. The last straw was when he showed up with a brochure for a nursing home. It's a residential community, he corrected when he saw my face. It's a very nice place, Eleanor. It has a nurse 24 hours a day, balanced meals, activities for seniors. You'd like it. That was the first time I lost my patience with him. Listen here, son. I spent my whole life taking care of myself, facing the river that's a lot more dangerous than any hill. I'm not going to stick myself in a place full of old people to wait for death to come, not now that I'm old. As long as I have the strength to get out of bed, I'm staying in my cabin. He turned red, embarrassed, and put the brochure away, but I saw something in his eyes that gave me a chill. A cold, calculating determination, as if to say, we'll see how long that lasts. The worst was realizing that Charlotte, my own daughter, was starting to side with her husband. Mom, Daniel only wants what's best for you. Mom, we worry about you being here alone. Mom, what if you fall or get sick? Who will help you? At first, I thought it was just genuine concern. Then I understood there was more to it. I started to notice other changes in her too. The way she looked at the cabin, no longer with the affection of someone who grew up there, but with a kind of calculation, an evaluation, the rush to leave when she came to visit me, the calls that were more and more rare, shorter and shorter. My girl was changing, and it wasn't for the better. One day, alone on the porch watching the river, I understood what was happening. It wasn't just Daniel who wanted the cabin. Charlotte wanted it too, not to live in, but to sell. Lake Havasu City had become a valuable, upscale area. Land like mine, with a river view, was worth a fortune. And in their minds, why wait for me to die if they could convince me to sell before that? It was like being slapped in the face. My own daughter, whom I raised alone after Walter died, whom I put through college with my hard-earned money, now saw me not as a mother, but as an obstacle between her and a pile of money, like a stubborn old woman who wouldn't get out of the way. I never confronted her directly about it. Maybe out of pride, maybe out of fear of hearing the truth from her own mouth, but I changed my way. I was more withdrawn when they came. I didn't give my opinion on anything anymore. If they brought up the subject of the cabin, I would dodge it, change the conversation. I created a kind of thick-skinned armor. The visits became rarer, the calls did too. Until one day, on the eve of my 74th birthday, I got a call from Charlotte. Mom, we want to surprise you for your birthday. Daniel rented a boat. We're going for a ride on the river like you love. I'll pick you up early tomorrow, okay? For a moment, I felt a pang of hope. Had I been wrong? Did they really care? Was everything just the imagination of a suspicious old woman? I accepted the invitation, excited by the idea of getting back on the river after so long. Little did I know that boat ride would be the beginning of the worst and the best chapter of my life. That morning of my 74th birthday, I woke up early, as I always do. The sun had barely risen, but I was already on the porch, watching the river that looked like a mirror. It was so calm. A good day for a ride, I thought to myself, feeling a strange joy, the kind you feel when you're going to see an old friend after a long time. The river was like that to me, an old friend I hadn't visited in years. I got ready more carefully than usual. I put on my light blue dress, one of those practical cotton ones that doesn't wrinkle and dries fast. I thought of it out of habit, the kind of clothing someone who knows the river knows can get wet at any moment. I put my hair in a tight bun, put sunscreen on the parts that were showing, and of course, I didn't take my father's watch off my wrist. That watch was almost a part of me. I'd even shower with it on. Charlotte arrived punctually, which was rare. She usually ran late, always with the same excuse. Traffic, Mom. This time, no. At 8 sharp, she was already honking outside. When I came out, I saw that it was just her, driving Daniel's car, a fancy silver sedan. Daniel's already at the pier, she explained. He went to take care of the last details on the boat. On the way to the marina, Charlotte seemed nervous. She was talking too much, gesturing, changing the subject in the middle of sentences. I thought it was just the anxiety of giving me a special gift. She knew how much I missed the river, how difficult it had been to give up guiding. "It's a beautiful boat, Mom," she said. "I think you're going to like it. It even has a covered part, in case the sun gets too strong." The Lake Havasu City Marina was about 20 minutes from my cabin by car, a more sophisticated place, frequented by rich people who kept yachts and sailboats there. It was never my kind of place. My guide boat always moored right on the beach, no fuss. When we arrived, Daniel was already waiting at the pier, all smiles, dressed in white from head to toe, looking like one of those magazine models. "Happy birthday, Eleanor," he exclaimed, coming to hug me. The hug was cold as always, but the smile seemed wider, more cheerful. "Ready for the best ride of your life?" That sounded strange to me at the time. Why would it be the best ride of my life? Me, who had spent decades on the river, who knew every wave, every current, but I let it go. I didn't want to seem ungrateful. The boat really was nice. It wasn't one of those luxury yachts, but it wasn't a simple guide boat either. It was what they call a day cruiser, with a small cabin in the front, an open space in the back with cushioned benches, and a powerful engine. "I rented it for the whole day," Daniel explained, helping me get on board. "We can go wherever you want." As soon as we got on, I noticed some strange details. First, there were no other passengers besides the three of us. Daniel had said it would be just us, but I imagined friends would come, maybe other relatives. But no, it was just us. Second, there was a bottle of champagne in an ice bucket and only 2 glasses. Third, I didn't see any life jackets in sight, something that any tour boat is required to have. But I swallowed my suspicions. I'm getting paranoid in my old age, I thought. It was my birthday. My daughter and my son-in-law had prepared a surprise. Why ruin it with baseless suspicions? Daniel took the wheel, and soon we were leaving the marina behind, cutting through the calm morning waters. The day couldn't have been more perfect. A deep blue sky, without a single cloud, a bright sun, but not too hot yet, a light breeze that barely rippled the surface of the water. I sat in the bow, feeling the occasional splash on my face, the familiar feeling of freedom that only the river provides. For a while, everything went well. Daniel navigated with reasonable skill, maintaining a pleasant speed. Charlotte stayed by my side, pointing out the islands we were passing, the other boats, a group of birds that were fishing ahead. We talked about mundane things, the weather, news from the neighborhood, a television show she thought I should watch. After about an hour, I realized we were getting pretty far from the shore. I could no longer make out the details of the buildings on the coast, just a line of outline against the sky. I also noticed that Daniel had changed course, heading for a more deserted area where there were no other boats in sight. "Where are we going?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "It's a surprise," Daniel answered without taking his eyes off the front. "A special place I discovered. It has an incredible view, and some herons that always show up there." "Herons?" I always liked herons. Back when I was a guide, it was common to see them following the boat, jumping in the waves that the boat left behind. It was considered a sign of good luck. But something about the way Daniel said it didn't sound right. It was as if he had rehearsed the phrase. Another half-hour passed, and now we were truly far away. The shore was just a thin line on the horizon. The river was still calm, but further out, the waves were a little bigger, the rocking more pronounced. Daniel finally slowed down and turned off the engine, letting the boat drift. "We're here," he announced, as if we had reached some special destination, but all around there was just water in all directions. No island, no reef, no point of reference, just open river. "Let's toast your birthday, Eleanor," he said, taking the bottle of champagne. With a practiced motion, he popped the cork, which flew far away and fell into the water. He poured 2 glasses, gave one to Charlotte, then took a plastic cup that was stored somewhere and poured for me too. "Why the plastic cup?" I asked, unable to stop myself. "Oh, I broke a glass by accident when I was setting everything up," he answered too quickly. There were only 2 left. He held out the cup to me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "To your health, Eleanor. May you have many more years ahead." I took the cup, but I didn't drink immediately. Instead, I watched as Daniel and Charlotte touched their glasses, took a sip, and then looked at me as if waiting. It was at that moment that I noticed the look between them, quick, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A knowing look from people who share a secret. My stomach sank. I pretended to bring the cup to my lips, but in reality, I just wet them lightly, without swallowing anything. The liquid had a strange, bitter taste that champagne shouldn't have. I lowered the cup and smiled, as if I had really drunk. Delicious, I lied. Thank you for the gift. Daniel seemed to relax a little, as if he had overcome some obstacle. Charlotte, on the other hand, was getting more and more tense, avoiding looking directly at me. You know, Eleanor, Daniel began, approaching casually. I've been thinking a lot about our last conversation, about the cabin. Ah, so that was it. We always came back to the same subject. What about the cabin, Daniel? I asked, already knowing where this was going. You're right not to want to leave there. It's your home, built with so much sacrifice. I think we haven't been fair to insist. I was genuinely surprised. It was the first time he seemed to agree with me on the subject. Was it possible that he had finally understood? That he had given up the idea of getting his hands on my property? But you know, he continued, I think we also haven't explained our side correctly. It's not just about the financial issue, although, of course, the cabin is worth a fortune today. It's that we want you to have comfort, security, a peaceful old age. I've already told you I'm fine in my cabin, Daniel, I said. I don't need any more comfort than that. I understand. He paused, looked at the horizon. Look, I think I saw a heron over there. Automatically, I turned in the direction he was pointing. I saw nothing but water. But before I could say that, I felt his hands on my back. A strong, decisive shove. I didn't even have time to scream. 1 second I was on the boat, the next I was falling, the air rushing around me, until I hit the water with an impact that knocked all the air out of my lungs. The water was cold, much colder than it seemed from the surface. The thermal shock was immediate, making my muscles contract involuntarily. I sank a few feet before I could get my bearings. The brightness above indicated the surface, and I swam instinctively in that direction. When my head broke the water, I heard the boat's engine starting. I turned just in time to see Daniel accelerating, pulling away quickly. Charlotte was at the stern, looking back. Our eyes met for a brief moment. There was no triumph in her gaze, no satisfaction, just a kind of sad resignation. Then she turned away and the boat continued to pull away until it was just a dot on the horizon. I stayed there floating, trying to process what had just happened. My own daughter, my own flesh and blood. She had agreed to let me die there, in the middle of the river, miles from the shore, for a cabin, for money. The pain of that betrayal was colder than the water around me. For a moment, a part of me wanted to give up. To let the water take me, just as it had taken my father so many years ago. It would be easy. All I had to do was stop fighting, let my body sink. The river would embrace me, take me to the bottom, to the silence, to the end of all the pain. But then I felt the watch on my wrist, still there, still working. Instinctively I looked at it. It was 11:23. The precision of that number, the continuity of that machine that had survived so many storms brought me back to reality. I didn't say it out loud, although there was no one to hear. I won't give you that satisfaction. The decision was made. I would fight. I would survive. I would go back. Not for revenge, although a part of me ardently desired it, but for the affirmation of life, for the refusal to be discarded as something worthless. The first step was to assess my situation. I looked around, spinning slowly in the water, to get a 360-degree view, just water in all directions. But wait. There, very far away, a thin, dark line, the shore, and a bright, almost imperceptible dot, the lookout for the Lake Havasu City harbor. Now I needed to calculate. Was the tide coming in or going out? The incoming tide would take me toward the shore. The outgoing tide would push me away. I observed the water around me, the way it moved. Years of experience told me that I was at the beginning of an outgoing tide. That wasn't good. It meant the current would be working against me, but it wasn't impossible. And the wind was blowing from east to west, not very strong, but constant. This would create small waves on the surface that I could use to my advantage if I swam diagonally to them. I knew the currents in that area well. There was a main one that ran parallel to the shore, and several secondary ones that formed because of the underwater topography. If I was right about my position, the best strategy would be to swim not directly to the shore, but slightly to the right, where the current would be less strong. I made a mental calculation of the distance. If the lookout I was seeing was really the one in Lake Havasu City, and considering my approximate position, I would be something between 3 and 4 miles from the shore. A formidable distance, especially for someone my age, but not impossible. I had already swum distances like that when I was younger, although in very different circumstances. Now for the technique. I couldn't just swim the crawl the whole distance. I would get tired too quickly. I would need to alternate styles, preserve energy, use the currents and waves to my advantage whenever possible. All of this passed through my head in a matter of minutes. The knowledge accumulated over decades on the river, condensed into a survival strategy. My father would be proud. "All right, old river," I murmured. "It's just the two of us again. Let's see who wins this time." I started swimming. The crawl for the initial distance, long and measured strokes, controlled breathing. The dress was heavy, but the cotton didn't restrict my movements much. I had kicked my shoes off as soon as I hit the water, an automatic instinct for someone who knows the river. I marked visual reference points. The lookout was the main one, of course, but also a cloud formation that seemed fixed on the horizon, a darker spot on the shoreline that I suspected was a wooded area. These points would help me maintain my direction and not swim in circles, a common mistake for those who get lost on the river. The first mile was almost easy. My body, despite my age, remembered the movements, found the rhythm. The water was cold, but not so cold as to cause immediate hypothermia. The sun helped maintain my body temperature. In the second mile, I started to feel tired. The muscles in my arms burned. My legs began to feel heavy. I switched to the backstroke for a while to use different muscle groups. The sky above was clear. The sun was almost directly overhead. It must have been around noon. I went back to the crawl when I felt a little recovered, but now with shorter strokes, saving energy. The shore seemed closer, but still terribly distant. The lookout flashed regularly, as if calling to me, challenging me to reach it. It was in the third mile that things started to get really difficult. My body no longer responded with the same readiness. Each stroke required a conscious effort, a direct order from my brain to muscles that wanted to give up. My breathing was more difficult, more labored. I had to stop a few times, just floating on my back, catching my breath. During one of those pauses, I felt something brush against my leg. A fish, probably, but the unexpected contact sent a jolt of adrenaline through my body. Sharks were rare in that area, but not impossible, and a body thrashing in the water could attract predators. I started swimming again with renewed urgency. The water began to get rougher. The wind had picked up, creating small but bothersome waves. Each one of them was a small battle. I either had to get over it before it broke, or I would get caught in the middle and swallow salty water that scratched my throat. I started talking to myself out loud. "Come on, Ellie, you've faced worse. Remember the storm of 2078? Now that was wild water. This is a piece of cake." Talking helped. It kept my mind focused, pushed away the despair that occasionally threatened to take over, and reminded me that I was still alive, still fighting. The sun began to set on the horizon. How long had I been in the water? 3 hours? 4? The watch on my wrist now read 3:42 p.m. More than 4 hours of swimming. Under normal conditions, I would have already covered the distance to the shore. But the conditions weren't normal. I wasn't young anymore. The current was against me, and exhaustion was taking its toll. That's when I saw a buoy, one of those big red ones that marks the navigation channel. It wasn't on my direct path to the shore, but it represented a potential resting place. I changed my route, swimming diagonally to reach it. When I finally grabbed the metal structure, it was like finding solid ground after a flood. My arms trembled with exhaustion. My legs barely had the strength to keep me afloat. I stayed there, hugging the buoy, breathing deeply, trying to regain some energy. The buoy had a small platform used by maintenance technicians, With immense effort, I managed to hoist myself onto it. It was small. I could barely sit on it, but it was solid. I allowed myself 10 minutes of absolute rest, just existing, feeling the sun, which was now more gentle on my skin, the familiar rocking of the buoy on the waves. I could see the shore better. It was closer than I had imagined. The lookout was clearly visible now, as were some larger buildings along the shoreline, maybe 1 to 1.5 miles at most, normally an easy distance. In the current circumstances, it seemed like a marathon, but I had no choice. Night would fall in a few hours, and swimming in the dark would be exponentially more dangerous. I had to continue while there was still light. With a deep sigh, I slid back into the water. My body immediately protested, muscles cramping, joints aching. I ignored the pain and started swimming again, now alternating the crawl and the breaststroke, which was easier on my already exhausted arms. The final stretch was the most difficult. Every yard seemed to cost double the energy. The current seemed stronger, as if the river itself was determined to stop me from getting there. Waves broke in my face more frequently, forcing me to swallow salty water that made me nauseous. Several times I thought about giving up. My body was begging for rest. My mind was starting to get confused. It would be so easy to stop fighting, to let the water carry me away from all that pain, that betrayal, that exhaustion. But every time that thought arose, I pushed it away with a memory, an image, my father teaching me to swim. The birth of Charlotte, my first successful catch, the view from my porch at dawn, small moments of joy, of triumph, of peace, moments that were worth continuing for. And there was also the image of Daniel and Charlotte returning to the dock, confident that I was dead, that their plan had worked. The idea of proving them wrong gave me an energy I didn't know I still had. The sky began to turn orange when I saw the entrance to the harbor. Guideboats were returning after their day on the river. Small tour boats were returning to the marina. No one noticed the small figure in the water swimming slowly toward the pier. The last 100 yards were almost in a trance. My body moved by pure stubbornness, by a refusal to accept defeat. The water became shallower. I could feel the sand underneath, but I didn't have the strength to stand up, to walk. I kept swimming, dragging myself more than properly swimming, until my hands touched the rocks of the pier. With a final effort, I grabbed a metal ladder embedded in the side of the pier. Every step was a battle. My arms trembled violently. My legs felt like jelly, but I climbed one step at a time until I finally rolled onto the solid concrete of the pier. I lay there for a few minutes, feeling the hard, rough ground under my back, my whole body throbbing, my breathing still labored. Alive. 8 hours. Against the current, against her age, against the odds, she survived. But sometimes, surviving the water is only the first battle. The real storm is waiting for her right here on the shore, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Against all odds, against the wishes of my own daughter, against age and exhaustion, I was alive. When I finally managed to sit up, I saw that some people were looking at me with curiosity. An old woman, soaked, seemingly having just emerged from the river. I must have looked like a ghost, a mythical creature. "Are you all right, ma'am?" a man asked, approaching hesitantly. "Do you need help?" I shook my head, still too out of breath to speak. I pointed to a nearby bench. He understood and helped me up, walking the few feet to the seat. "Do you want me to call an ambulance?" he insisted, visibly worried. "No," I finally managed to say. "I just need to rest a little." He nodded uncomfortably, not knowing what to do. He ended up walking away, casting worried glances over his shoulder. Sitting on the bench, I felt my body start to calm down, my breathing gradually returning to normal. I looked at the watch on my wrist. Incredibly, it was still working. It read 7:17 p.m., almost 8 hours in the water, 8 hours fighting for my life. It was then that I saw it, the boat, the same one that had taken me to the river, that had sped away, leaving me to die. It was entering the harbor now, Daniel at the helm, Charlotte beside him, looking tense, worried. Of course they would be. They had to create a story, a tragic accident. The elderly mother-in-law who fell off the boat when everyone was distracted, the desperate, fruitless search, the painful decision to return to the harbor to get help. A story carefully constructed to hide the truth, premeditated murder, deliberate abandonment. I stayed motionless, watching as they docked, as they tied up the boat. I saw the exact moment they saw me. Daniel saw me first. He was helping Charlotte get off the boat. When his eyes lifted and met mine, the color drained from his face. He froze in the middle of the movement, his hand still extended to my daughter. Charlotte noticed something was wrong, followed his gaze, and then she saw me too. Her reaction was even more dramatic. She put her hands to her mouth, stumbled as if she had been hit. She had to lean on the side of the boat to keep from falling. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I just sat there, soaked but alive, looking directly at them. A lot of folks would ask why I didn't scream, why I didn't call for the law. But the river teaches you that the biggest wave isn't always the loudest one. My silence, my being alive that was the storm that swamped their little plan. The look of pure terror in their eyes was worth more than any accusation I could ever make. The fear on their faces was all the confirmation I needed. There was no way to pretend happy surprise, relief at finding me alive. There was only the terror of someone who sees their plans crumble, of someone who faces the living proof of their crime. After a moment that seemed like an eternity, I slowly got up. Every muscle in my body protested, but I stood up straight, dignified. I turned my back on them and began to walk away from the pier. That wasn't me running away. That was me choosing a new current to follow. The river gave me back to the shore, and I wasn't about to waste that gift by looking backward. Every step I took was a declaration. My life belongs to me, not to them. In that silence, Ellie was louder than she had ever been. She didn't need accusations. Her survival was the verdict. But this is far from over. A woman with this much strength doesn't just walk away without a plan. Let's see what move the river guide makes now that she's back on solid ground. Each step was an agony, but also a victory. Every yard I put between us was a yard toward a new life. I didn't look back. I didn't need to see their expressions, their confusion, their panic. I knew they were there, paralyzed, not knowing what to do. The perfect plan had gone wrong, and now they were facing what they feared most, a living witness to their own crime. That night I slept at a neighbor's house. Susan had always been good to me, and when I showed up at her door, soaked and exhausted, she didn't ask questions. She gave me dry clothes, hot food, a place to sleep. She just said, "You can tell me tomorrow if you want to. For now, you need to rest." And I rested. A deep sleep, without dreams, my body recovering from the immense effort. When I woke up the next morning, every muscle ached as if I had been beaten, but I was alive, and that's all that mattered. But being alive was a different thing from living. The first few weeks back in my cabin were the hardest. The silence was a heavy blanket, suffocating me. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a footstep I didn't want to hear. I'd sit on my porch for hours watching the river, but I felt no connection to it. It was just water, cold and vast, a constant reminder of what had happened. The betrayal had hollowed me out, leaving an emptiness that no amount of sunshine could fill. I had survived the river, but I wasn't sure how to survive the memory of my own daughter's face as she watched me drown. It was during one of those empty afternoons that old Sam, one of my father's last living contemporaries, stopped by. He was frail, his hands gnarled like old driftwood, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. He didn't say much, just sat with me on the porch, watching the water. Finally, he pointed a shaky finger towards the children playing on the beach. "Your father taught you everything he knew, Ellie," he said, his voice raspy with age. "And you learned more on top of that. That knowledge, it's a treasure. It's a crime to let a treasure like that sink to the bottom of your grief." He left as quietly as he came, but his words stuck with me. A treasure. For the first time in weeks, I saw the river not as a tomb, but as a legacy, and I began to wonder what I was supposed to do with it. I knew Daniel and Charlotte would come after me. They would need to ensure my silence, come up with some story to explain the accident, convince me not to go to the police, but I wasn't ready to face them. Not yet. I needed time to think, to decide what to do. The river had given me a second chance. I wasn't going to waste it with hasty decisions. To this day, I wonder what was going through their heads when they saw me sitting on that bench on the pier. Me, who was supposed to be dead at the bottom of the river, eaten by fish, was there, soaked, but alive, looking them both directly in the eyes. It was as if they had seen a ghost. Daniel, who was always so talkative, so full of smooth talk, was speechless. Charlotte, my own daughter, almost fainted. She had to hold on to the side of the boat to keep from falling. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The silence spoke louder than any words. That moment, frozen in time, said it all. They knew that I knew. There was no way to pretend it was an accident, that they were desperate when I fell, that they searched for hours. The look of terror gave away the whole truth. I remember it like it was yesterday. The smell of the river, the sound of the waves hitting the pier, the seagulls screaming up above, and that heavy silence between the three of us. A silence that screamed all the betrayals, all the lies, all the evil they had tried to do to me. In a movie, maybe I would have raised my voice, made a scene, called the police. But in real life, at that moment, all I could feel was a kind of strange peace. I had survived. I had beaten not only the river, but their evil, and that was enough for me at that moment. I got up slowly, my whole body aching from the effort of swimming for hours. I straightened what was left of my soaked dress, ran my hand through my hair matted with salt, and simply turned my back on them. I started to walk, each step a victory, each yard that I put between us a liberation. I didn't look back a single time. I didn't need to see their faces, their panic, their confusion. I knew they were there, paralyzed, not knowing what to do. The perfect plan had gone wrong, and now they were facing what they feared most, a living witness to their own crime. Whoever goes through something like this changes forever. It's not just the shock of almost dying, it's knowing that it was the people closest to you who tried to kill you. Your own daughter, the one you carried in your womb, who you breastfed, who you raised with so much sacrifice. How do you process a betrayal like that? How do you keep living after that? That night, I didn't go back to my cabin. I was afraid they would show up there, try to finish the job in some other way. I went to Susan's house, an old neighbor who had always been good to me. I arrived at her door soaked, exhausted, looking like a ghost. The poor woman almost had a heart attack when she saw me. My goodness, Ellie, what happened to you? I didn't tell her the whole truth. I just said that I had fallen off a boat during a ride and had swum to the shore. It was hard enough to believe, even without the part that my own daughter had participated in the attempt to kill me. Susan didn't ask any more questions. She gave me dry clothes, a hot bowl of soup, a mattress to sleep on. A good woman, the kind you don't find anymore these days. You can tell me tomorrow if you want, she said. For now, you need to rest. I slept like a rock, my body defeated by exhaustion. Waking up the next morning, every muscle screaming in pain, I knew I was alive for a reason, and I knew exactly what I had to do. That same morning, after thanking Susan, I went straight to Justin's house. He had been a guiding partner of my late husband's, but unlike us, he had gone to school. He became a lawyer when he was nearly 40, one of those rare cases of someone who fights their whole life to achieve a dream. Now he had a small office in downtown Lake Havasu City, where he mainly served simple people like us. Justin almost fell out of his chair when I walked in the door. Eleanor, I was just thinking about you. It's your birthday today, isn't it? I was going to stop by later to give you a hug. When I told him what had happened, I saw his face change from surprise to horror, then to anger. Justin had always had a special affection for me and Walter. We were among the first to encourage him to study, to lend him books, to believe that he could be more than a simple guide. Ellie, you have to report them. That's attempted murder. They planned it, they carried it out. They just didn't succeed because you're stronger than they imagined. I explained my reasons for not wanting to involve the police. He didn't agree at first, but he respected my decision. So, what do you want to do? I want to change my will, I answered without hesitation. Today, Justin understood right away. The reason for all of this was the cabin, the valuable land with a river view. If I died without a will, Charlotte, as my only daughter would inherit everything automatically. But I could change that. Do you have someone in mind? Another relative, a friend? I don't want to leave it to any one person, I explained. I want to leave it to the Lake Havasu City River Guides Cooperative. Those people who are trying to preserve traditional guiding, who help the older guides, who teach the young people. Justin nodded, approving the idea. I can prepare that today. It's a simple document. You just have to be sure that this is what you want. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, I answered. As he was drafting the document, he told me that the cooperative was growing, doing important work. Besides organizing the guides to get better prices, they were fighting against overfishing, teaching sustainable techniques, preserving the traditional knowledge that was being lost with the death of the older guides. They'll make good use of your cabin, Eleanor. They can turn it into a study center, a meeting place, a school for the new generation. The idea pleased me. My cabin, which had been built with so much sacrifice, with the money from the fish I had caught my whole life, would continue to serve the guiding community even after I was gone. It was a way to honor not only my work, but also my father's, my husband's, and everyone who had lived off the river honestly. I signed the new will that same afternoon. Justin called 2 secretaries from the neighboring notary's office as witnesses. An official document, notarized, with no chance of contestation. Now, even if they tried again and were successful the next time, they wouldn't get what they wanted so badly. The next day, I went back to my cabin. I was a little scared, I won't deny it, but I couldn't live on the run. That cabin was mine, earned with sweat and sacrifice. No one was going to take me from there. When I arrived, I noticed that the door had been opened. Someone had entered in my absence. They didn't take anything of value. The little money I kept was still hidden in the same place, just like the few pieces of jewelry I had. But I noticed that they had rummaged through papers, documents, probably looking for the deed to the cabin, something that could be used now that the original plan had failed. Just in case, I took the important documents to Justin's house. It's better for you to keep them here in the office safe, he suggested. It's safer. That same week, I received the visit I was expecting. Daniel and Charlotte appeared at my door, she with her eyes swollen from crying, he with that controlled expression of someone who had rehearsed every word to be said. Mom, thank God you're okay, Charlotte began, trying to hug me. I moved away, keeping my distance. You don't have to pretend, Charlotte. The 3 of us know what happened on that boat. It was a terrible accident, Eleanor. Daniel interjected, his voice deliberately shaky. You slipped, you fell. We looked for hours, but the river was choppy. We couldn't find you. The river was as calm as a lake, Daniel. And you didn't look for anything. You sped up the boat as soon as I fell. I saw it with my own eyes. They exchanged quick, nervous glances. The rehearsed story wasn't working. You must have been confused, disoriented in the water, he tried again. Daniel, I swam for 8 hours to get to the harbor. I cut in, looking directly into his eyes. I had plenty of time to think, to remember exactly what happened. Your hands on my back, the engine accelerating, the 2 of you abandoning me to die. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Charlotte started to cry, but they weren't tears of repentance. They were tears of fear, of despair at having been discovered. What are you going to do? Daniel finally asked, completely dropping the mask of concern. Are you going to the police? No, I answered calmly. I'm not going to the police. I saw the immediate relief on their faces. They thought they had gotten away with it, that I was willing to pretend that nothing had happened, maybe out of shame, maybe out of maternal love. But I want you to know 2 things, I continued, my voice steady as a rock in the current. First, you wanted this cabin so badly you were willing to kill for it. Well, you will never have it. I've changed my will. Everything, this cabin, this land, this view, it will all go to the River Guides Cooperative when I die. It will be used to teach the next generation how to respect the river, not exploit it. My legacy will be about knowledge, not greed. I saw the shock turn to pure rage in Daniel's eyes. Second, you wanted me gone. In a way, you got your wish. The mother, the grandmother you knew, is gone. You are never welcome in my home again. Get out. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about justice, Ellie's version of it. By securing her legacy, she took away the one thing they were willing to kill for. Now, with the ghosts of the past finally banished, what will she build from the ashes of this betrayal? The next chapter of her life is about to begin. Mom, Charlotte sobbed. You can't do this. We're your family. Charlotte, family doesn't try to kill family. Family doesn't push their own mother off a boat to get her cabin. You don't have proof, Daniel thundered, completely losing his composure. It's your word against ours. That's true. I don't have proof, I agreed. That's why I didn't go to the police. But the three of us know what happened, and that's enough for me. I stood up, indicating that the conversation was over. Now, please, get out of my cabin. Daniel grabbed Charlotte's arm, who was still sobbing, and pulled her toward the door. At the last moment, he turned, his face contorted with rage. You're going to regret this, Eleanor. No one will believe a crazy old woman. We're going to contest that will. We're going to prove that you're not in your right mind. You can try, I answered calmly. Justin, who is a lawyer and drafted the document, would love to meet you in court. He also has some questions about what happened on that boat. Mentioning Justin was the final blow. Daniel knew who he was. He knew his reputation in town. He knew he wouldn't be an easy opponent. Without another word, he left, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. The following weeks were difficult. Despite my decision not to report them, the story spread through the neighborhood. The guide who had helped me at the pier told others about the state he found me in. Susan commented to some friends about how I arrived at her house, soaked, exhausted. And of course, people noticed the sudden break with my daughter, who had previously visited me regularly. In the small world of Lake Havasu City, everyone soon knew, or thought they knew, what had happened. The versions varied. Some said it had been an accident, and that I was unfairly blaming my daughter. Others believed the attempted murder story, but most were on my side. After all, they had known me for decades. They had seen my life of honest work, of daily struggle. Daniel and Charlotte started to avoid me completely. When they saw me on the street, they would cross to the other side. In the rare community events where we would run into each other, they would keep their distance, pretending I didn't exist. At first, it hurt. Even after everything, she was my daughter, the child I had carried in my womb, who I had seen take her first steps, who I had taught to swim. But with time, the pain subsided, giving way to a kind of resigned acceptance. It was about a month after the incident that I had an idea. I was sitting on my porch, as always, watching the river, when I saw a group of children on the beach. They were playing at the water's edge, going in and out of the small waves, laughing and shouting, but I noticed that several of them barely knew how to swim. They would only go in where they could touch the bottom, and even then, with fear. I remembered my own childhood, how my father taught me to swim even before I could walk right, how that knowledge had saved my life not just once, but twice when his boat sank in the storm, and recently, when I was thrown into the river to die. These children need to learn to swim, I thought. Not just to have fun, but to protect themselves. The next day, I went down to the beach and approached some mothers who were there with their children. I introduced myself. Most of them already knew me, at least by sight, and I offered to teach the children to swim for free, of course, just as something to do, as a way to pass on my knowledge. Some were suspicious at first. An old woman wanting to teach children to swim seemed strange, but others who knew me better, who knew about my past as a guide, accepted right away. We started with a small group, 5 or 6 children, between 6 and 10 years old. I met them in the shallowest part of the beach, where the water barely reached the little ones' waists. First, I taught them to float, then to kick their legs, to move their arms, all with calmness, with patience, respecting each one's pace and fear. The children learned quickly, much faster than adults. In a few weeks, they were already swimming beyond the breakers, confident, happy. The impressed mothers started bringing more children. The group kept growing, 10, 15, 20 students. It wasn't just swimming that I taught. I talked about the river, about the currents, about how to read the waves, how to understand the wind. I told stories from my time as a guide, about the storms I faced, about the fish I caught. I transmitted the knowledge I had received from my father, who in turn had received it from his father. An ancestral knowledge passed down from generation to generation that was being lost in the modern world of motorboats and GPS. The lessons happened 3 times a week, always early in the morning, when the river was calmer and the sun was less strong. I would arrive before the agreed time, do my stretches my old muscles needed to be prepared, and wait for my little students at the water's edge. It was on one of those mornings, about 3 months after I started the lessons, that I had a surprise. A man approached, watching from a distance, while I was teaching a group of children to do the backstroke. "Ellie," he called when I took a break from the lesson, "can I talk to you for a minute?" It was Aaron, the president of the River Guides Cooperative, a middle-aged man, the son and grandson of guides, who had taken over the leadership of the group years ago. "Of course, Aaron. What can I do for you?" "Actually, I came to make a proposal," he said, seeming a little nervous. "We've been hearing about the work you're doing with the children, teaching them to swim, telling them about the river, passing on knowledge." I nodded, waiting for him to continue. "The cooperative is starting a new project. We want to create a kind of river school, to teach not only how to guide, but all the traditional knowledge, navigation, weather, currents, river wildlife, to preserve this knowledge that's being lost." "That seems like a great idea," I commented, genuinely interested. "And we'd like to invite you to be a part of it, as an instructor, as a consultant, however you prefer. No one knows the river better than you do around here." I was surprised by the invitation. At 75, I thought my time to contribute had passed, that I was just filling my days until the end came. The idea of starting something new, of having a purpose again, caught me off guard. "I don't know, Aaron. I'm too old to start new projects." "You've already started," he said, pointing to the children playing in the water. "What you're doing here on your own is exactly the kind of thing we want in the project. We're just offering a structure, some support." I thought for a moment. What did I have to lose? My days were filled mainly with loneliness since the break with Charlotte. The swimming lessons had been a ray of light, a new joy. Why not expand on that? "All right," I finally agreed. "I'll participate in your project, but on one condition. I want to continue giving swimming lessons here on the beach. The children are enjoying it, and so am I." "Of course, Eleanor. In fact, we could even incorporate that as an official part of the project, get some equipment, life jackets for the beginners, things like that." And so began a new phase of my life, one that I never imagined I would have at 75. The very river that was meant to be her grave has now become the source of her rebirth. Eleanor is transforming her pain into purpose, teaching a new generation to respect the water that almost claimed her. Stick around to witness how the old lady who beat the river becomes a legend in her own community. In addition to the swimming lessons, I started giving talks to the young guides at the cooperative's headquarters. I talked about how to read the weather, how to identify fish schools from a distance, how to navigate using the stars when technology failed knowledge that I had accumulated over decades on the river and that I could now pass on. The project grew quickly. Soon we were serving not only children from the community, but also from neighboring towns. We got support from the city council and some local environmental nonprofits. We bought equipment, built a small structure on the beach to store the material. We even got a small boat for practical lessons with the more advanced students. I developed a specific program for river safety, teaching not only how to swim, but also first aid, rescue techniques, how to act in emergencies. The idea came, of course, from my own near-death experience. If I, with all my experience, had almost not survived, what could be said of someone without any training? "Eleanor, you saved my son," a mother told me one day, tears in her eyes. Her boy of just 7 years had fallen from a rock during a family outing. Thanks to the lessons, he knew to stay calm, to float properly, and to wait for rescue instead of fighting against the current. If it weren't for what you taught him, he could have drowned. Stories like this multiplied over the months. Children who saved friends in difficulty, applying what they had learned. Young guides who faced unexpected storms and knew how to return to the harbor safely. Tourists rescued by local residents trained in our program. Without realizing it, I had created something important, something that made a real difference in people's lives. And in the process, I had found a new family, not of blood but of heart. The younger instructors at the cooperative treated me with an almost reverential respect, always asking for advice, listening to my stories. The children adored me, running to hug me when they saw me arrive at the beach. The parents would thank me, invite me to lunches, birthday parties, celebrations. Little by little, the pain of Charlotte's betrayal was being replaced by a new joy, a new sense of belonging. It wasn't the family I had imagined I would have in my old age, but it was a family just the same. The project's fame went beyond the borders of Lake Havasu City. Newspapers from Scottsdale did stories on it. Then came television crews from Phoenix. They called me the River Guardian, a 5-year-old woman who taught children to swim and guides to respect the river. The interviews made me uncomfortable at first. I never liked the spotlight, but I understood that the visibility helped the project grow, get more support, and reach more people. In one of those reports, the journalist asked what motivated me. Why at 75, instead of resting, had I decided to start such an ambitious project? The river saved me twice, I answered simply. Now I'm returning the favor. I didn't go into detail about the second time, about the boat, the shove, the fight for survival. That part of the story stayed between me, the river, and the culprits. But the first rescue, when I was a child and my father's boat sank, I always told that one. It was part of the legend, of the myth that was forming around me. The Lake Havasu City community began to see me differently. I was no longer just the old retired guide, the widow who lived alone in her cabin on the river. I was a kind of living treasure, a guardian of ancestral knowledge, a protector of the new generation. This change in status became clear on a day of a bad storm. The river was agitated. Enormous waves were hitting the shore. The wind howled like a wounded animal. A guide boat hadn't returned. 5 men, all experienced, but caught by surprise by the sudden turn in the weather. The park rangers had been called, but they would take time to arrive. The community gathered on the beach, worried, powerless in the face of the river's fury. That's when someone suggested, "Let's ask Eleanor, she'll know what to do." They came to get me at my cabin, took me to the beach, and told me the situation. I looked at the agitated river, at the dark sky, at the horizon where the missing boat had been lost. I closed my eyes, felt the wind on my face, the smell of the storm. "They're alive," I said finally. "They must have taken shelter behind Lake Mohave. It's the only safe place with this southwest wind." I explained that with that wind direction, the lake created a kind of protected zone where the waters were calmer. It was old knowledge, passed from guide to guide for generations. The younger ones, with their motorboats and GPS, sometimes forgot these traditional skills, but in an emergency, instinct prevailed. A group of younger guides, who had bigger, safer boats, offered to go to the lake. I gave them detailed instructions about the route to follow, the currents to avoid, the signs that would indicate a change in the weather. 3 hours later, they returned, towing the missing boat. The 5 men were exactly where I had said, anchored behind the lake, waiting for the storm to pass. Their boat had suffered an engine failure, leaving them adrift. Using the spare oars, they had managed to reach the shelter of the lake, but they wouldn't have been able to get back to the harbor without help. That episode solidified my position in the community once and for all. It wasn't superstition or respect for my age. It was the recognition of a real, valuable knowledge that had saved lives. In the following months, the cooperative's project expanded even more. We built our own headquarters, a small training center near the beach. I started training instructors so that the knowledge wouldn't be lost when I was no longer there. We developed educational materials, pamphlets on river safety, guides for identifying fish and currents. By this time, I had turned 76. My body was starting to feel the weight of the years. Pains in my joints on rainy days, shortness of breath during more intense exercises, my vision not as sharp as before, but my mind remained sharp, and my desire to teach, to pass on what I knew, only increased. It was around this time that I received a letter. It had no return address, Just my name and address written in a handwriting that I recognized immediately. Charlotte. I hesitated to open it. Almost a year had passed since the incident, since our break. The pain was no longer as acute, but it was still there, dormant beneath the surface. What could she want after so long? Finally, curiosity won out. Inside the envelope, a single sheet of paper with a few lines written on it. Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I separated from Daniel. He left, went back to Scottsdale. I'm living alone now, trying to fix my life. I know we'll probably never talk again, and I understand that. I just wanted you to know that I deeply regret what I did, what I let happen. Not a day goes by that I don't think about it, that I don't hate myself for it. Your daughter, Charlotte. I read and reread the letter several times. There was no request for reconciliation, no attempt to justify the unjustifiable. Just a recognition of guilt, a confession of regret. I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say, how to react. A part of me wanted to believe in her repentance. I wanted to give her a second chance. Another part, harder, more calloused by life, remembered her look on that boat, the silent complicity, the willingness to let her own mother die for money. I put the letter in a drawer and tried not to think about it anymore. I had a new life now, new purposes, new people who depended on me. The past was the past. Letting it go was the only way to move forward. And so, the days turned into weeks, the weeks into months, the months into years. The cooperative's project continued to grow, to transform. From simple swimming lessons on the beach, we evolved into a complete river education program, recognized even outside the state. My activities adapted as I got older. At 78, I no longer got in the water for practical demonstrations. I left that to the younger instructors I had trained, but I continued giving theoretical lessons, telling stories, advising, supervising. I was the river grandma, as the children had started to call me affectionately. The cabin on the river, which had been the reason for so much covetousness, so much tragedy, gradually transformed into a community space while I was still alive. The porch, where I spent so many hours looking at the horizon, became a place for informal meetings, for telling stories to the children in the project. The living room hosted small exhibitions about river life, guiding culture, local history. The yard became a space for parties, celebrations, community gatherings. It wasn't a conscious decision to open my cabin like that. It happened naturally, organically, as my life and the project's life became more and more intertwined. The cabin stopped being just the place where I lived and became part of the collective heritage, an extension of the cooperative, a symbol of the continuity between past, present, and future. On rainy or very windy days, when the lessons on the beach were canceled, the children would come to my porch. They would sit in a circle around me, and I would tell stories from my time as a guide, about the shipwrecks I witnessed, the enormous fish I caught. I talked about my father, about how he taught me to read the river, to respect its forces, to take advantage of its generosity. Ellie, were you ever afraid of the river? A boy asked me once. Afraid? I was never afraid, I answered sincerely. Respect? Yes, a lot of respect. The river is like an older, wiser relative. You don't fear it, but you listen when it talks, you obey when it commands. The children absorbed these lessons, these small fragments of wisdom, and carried them with them. Little by little, they became not only good swimmers, good sailors, but guardians of that ancestral knowledge, of that special relationship with the river that had shaped our community for generations. Looking at them, at their attentive faces, their curious eyes, I felt a kind of peace I had never experienced before. Life had turned so many corners, so many ups and downs, so many losses and gains, and there, at the end of it, I had found a purpose I hadn't expected, a way to leave a legacy that went beyond material possessions or blood ties. The old woman who beat the river was now teaching others to do the same, not just to survive in it, but to understand it, to respect it, to love it, as I had always loved it. And from time to time, on clear days, when the horizon stretched out infinitely in front of me, I would think of Charlotte. Where was she? How was she? Did she still think of me? Of the failed attempt to get rid of me? Deep, deep down, a part of my heart still held a space for her. Not for the woman who had conspired against me, but for the girl she had been, for the daughter I had loved above all else. Maybe one day, I thought, maybe one day there would be a reconciliation, a forgiveness. Not now, maybe not so soon, but one day. The river taught me that even the most violent storms eventually pass, that after the highest waves always comes the calm. For now, I was content with the life I had built from the ashes of betrayal. A life that, surprisingly, had become richer, more fulfilling, more meaningful than I ever imagined it would be at this advanced age. As my father used to say, the river takes, Ellie. But the river also gives. You just have to know how to wait, how to receive. And that's how, after all these years, I found myself sitting on my porch, looking at the horizon, as I always did, when I suddenly saw that couple standing in front of me. The man, already with gray hair, looked at me, and his eyes widened as if he had seen a ghost. It took me a few seconds to recognize who he was, but when I did, I almost laughed. Daniel, the same man who had shoved me off a boat 9 years ago, hoping I would disappear forever in the currents. There he was, standing in front of me, with a woman much younger than him clinging to his arm. When our eyes met, I saw the same fear as years ago. First, the surprise at seeing me still alive. Then, the fear that I might say something, reveal his secret to his new wife. He grabbed the girl's arm with so much force that she winced in pain, and he pulled her away, stumbling over his own feet in his haste. That unexpected encounter took me back in time, made me relive that whole story as if it had been yesterday, not almost a decade ago. The boat, the drink, the shove, the endless hours in the cold water, the fight for survival, the arrival at the dock, and then everything that came after the transformation of my life from a tragedy into a kind of rebirth. She tried to get in touch a few times over the years, first with that simple letter, then with others more detailed, asking for forgiveness, saying she was repentant, that she had been manipulated by Daniel. Meanwhile, my life was following its new course. The project with the River Guides Cooperative grew more every year. What started as simple swimming lessons for the neighborhood children transformed into a complete river education program recognized throughout the Canyon region. Young people came from other towns to learn. University professors showed up to document our work. Even people from outside the country started to get interested in what we were doing. My cabin, the very one that Daniel coveted so much, transformed into a small community center while I was still alive. It wasn't a planned decision. It happened naturally, organically. First, it was the cooperative meetings that started to be held on my porch because it was the place with the best view of the river. Then, when it rained or got very windy, the theoretical lessons for the children started to be given in the living room. Over time, the yard became a space for community parties, celebrations for new boats, celebrations for good catches. The cabin stopped being just the place where I lived and became an extension of the project, a community space where everyone felt at home. People came and went freely, brought food, fixed things that broke, took care of the garden. It was as if the property had already been transferred to the cooperative in life, not just on paper, through the will. Over the years, dozens and dozens of children passed through our classes. We taught swimming, of course, but much more than that. We taught them about the currents, about the winds, about the tides, about the fish, their breeding seasons, their migratory cycles, about the importance of sustainable guiding, of respecting the closed seasons, of preserving the river environment. Many of these children became adults who remained connected to the river in some way. Some became guides, following the tradition of their parents and grandparents, but with an environmental awareness that previous generations didn't have. Others became instructors in our own project, passing on the knowledge they received. There were even some who went on to study oceanography, marine biology, and fisheries engineering, taking the traditional knowledge into academia, mixing it with modern science. Seeing these young people grow, learn, and develop was like seeing small seeds that I planted sprouting and flourishing. Each of them carried a piece of my knowledge, my experience, my history. It was a different kind of immortality, not through blood, direct lineage, but through ideas, values, and teachings that would survive my passing. My father's old watch continued on my wrist, day after day, year after year. It was no longer just a memory of him, the last object left after the river took him. It had also become a symbol of my own survival, of my own struggle against the waters. A constant reminder that time keeps passing, relentlessly, no matter what happens in our lives. The children loved to hear the story of the watch. They would sit in a circle on the porch, their eyes wide with curiosity and wonder. As I told them how that little object had survived 2 mishaps, had been a witness to 2 generations of struggle against the river and against human evil. My father's watch is like his heart that keeps beating, I would explain to them. Each tick-tock is like he's telling me, Ellie, keep going, asterisk, asterisk. Sometimes, when the night was clear and the stars shone like lanterns in the sky, I would take the older children to the shore, teach them the names of the constellations, how the ancient navigators used them to get their bearings, how my father taught me to always find my way back home by looking at the sky. The river is treacherous, I would tell them. It can change its mood in the blink of an eye, but the sky is constant. The stars have been there for millions of years, and they'll be there long after we've turned to dust. With time, I developed a kind of philosophy of my own, about the river, about life. It wasn't anything complicated or fancy. It was simple wisdom, distilled from decades of experience, of observation, of struggle and survival. The river doesn't choose an age to respect. It respects those who respect it. It doesn't matter if you're 10 or 80 years old. If you understand the river, if you know how to read its moods, if you never underestimate its strength, it will treat you as an equal. People started to write down these phrases, these small fragments of wisdom. A teacher at the local school even made a little book with them, distributed to the students as a complementary material in science and environmental education classes. The Wisdom of the River. Teachings of Eleanor was the title. I felt a little embarrassed when I saw it, but also proud. I never thought my words could have any value beyond my own community. Little by little, I began to understand that traumatic event, the shove, the betrayal, the fight for survival, had been transformed into something positive. It wasn't done on purpose at first, not as a conscious decision. It was more like a plant that sprouts between rocks, finds a way even when it seems impossible. If I hadn't been thrown into the river, if I hadn't swum for hours until exhaustion, if I hadn't survived against all odds, maybe I would never have started the project with the children. Maybe I would never have gotten close to the cooperative. Maybe I would have spent my last years just sitting on the porch, looking at the horizon, waiting for the end to come. The tragedy had been transformed into purpose, the pain into motivation, the loneliness into community. It wasn't the path I would have chosen if I had a choice, but it was the path that life, or the river, had chosen for me. And I had learned to navigate it, even in the roughest waters. The years went by and my body felt their weight. At 80, I no longer got in the water for practical demonstrations. I left that to the younger instructors I had trained, but I continued supervising the project, telling stories, advising, sharing knowledge. I was the river grandma, as the children had started to call me affectionately. It was around this time that I received an unexpected visit. I was sitting on the porch as always when I saw a woman slowly approaching on the path from the beach. She had gray hair tied in a simple bun. She walked with the help of a cane. She looked tired from the walk. Only when she got closer did I recognize Charlotte. My daughter had aged far beyond her 60 years. Her face was marked by deep wrinkles. Her body was hunched as if she was carrying an invisible weight. Her eyes, however, were the same ones that had looked at me from the boat as I thrashed in the water, the same ones that had reflected horror at seeing me alive on the dock. I instinctively tensed up. So many years had passed, but the body has a memory. And mine remembered the betrayal, the pain, the abandonment. "Mom," she said simply, her voice trembling a little. I didn't respond immediately. I looked at her, trying to reconcile the image of the young woman she had been with this elderly woman in front of me, trying to find in her some trace of the girl I had raised, who I had loved unconditionally. "Can I sit down?" she asked, indicating the empty chair beside me. I nodded silently. She settled in with difficulty, leaning her cane against the wall, moaning softly with the effort. For a few minutes we just stayed like that, side by side, looking at the river, the same river that had almost taken me, that had almost separated us forever, in a much more definitive way than the distance of the last few years. I came to ask for forgiveness, she finally said without looking at me. I know I don't deserve it. I know what I did, what I let happen, is unforgivable, but I have to say it anyway. I felt a lump in my throat, a confused mixture of emotions, anger, sadness, longing, a strange kind of relief. So many times I had imagined this moment, this reunion. So many rehearsed answers, so many unspoken words. Charlotte, why? Was all I could ask. Why did you do that? She sighed deeply, as if she had been waiting for that question for years, as if she had rehearsed the answer 1,000 times. I don't have excuses, Mom. Only explanations. And I know they're not enough. Daniel, he had this power over me. He made me believe the most absurd things, that you were becoming senile, that you would end up selling the cabin to some con artist, that we were just protecting your property, your legacy. She paused, took a deep breath. I started out believing it was for your own good. Later, when I realized where that was leading us, it was already too late. I was too involved, too committed, and I was also afraid of him, of what he could do if I backed out, if I told someone. Another, longer pause. But that's not an excuse. I was an adult, responsible for my choices. I could have said no. I could have stopped it. I didn't. And I'll carry that guilt for the rest of my life. We were silent again. The sound of the waves breaking on the shore was the only soundtrack for that long-delayed moment of reckoning. I heard you and Daniel separated, I commented finally. She nodded. Right after that day, he changed with me. He became aggressive, started drinking a lot. I think the guilt was eating him up inside, just like it was eating me up. But instead of facing it, he ran away, until one day he just left. And what did you do all these years? I tried to rebuild my life. I went back to work. I got a job at a store in Scottsdale. I rented a small apartment. I lived quietly, alone, and I thought a lot about what I had done, about how I had become someone capable of something like that. I looked at her. I really looked, and I saw something I hadn't seen before. It wasn't just a woman aged by time, but a woman broken inside. Her shoulders were slumped, her eyes were dull, her expression was that of someone who carries a heavy burden. I read your letters, I said. All of them? She seemed surprised. You never responded. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if it was possible to rebuild anything after what happened. And now? She asked, a slight tremor of hope in her voice. Do you think it's possible? I didn't answer immediately. I looked at the river, at the infinite horizon, at the sun that was beginning to set, painting the sky with orange and pink. I thought about everything I had lived, learned, and built in the years since that fateful day. Charlotte, I don't know, I answered honestly. I don't know if we can go back to being what we were before. There are wounds that leave permanent scars. But maybe we can build something new, something different, if we have time. A river never flows backward, you see. After a flood, it doesn't go back to its old bed. It carves a new path. Forgiveness is like that. It's not about erasing the scar, but about allowing a new current to start flowing, slow and careful as it may be. Maybe that's how you truly begin to heal yourself. Forgiveness is perhaps the hardest current to navigate, especially after such a deep betrayal. This isn't about forgetting, but about choosing a new path forward, a testament to Eleanor's immense strength of character. As our story comes to a close, let's see how this final, quiet chapter unfolds, and what legacy the River Grandma truly leaves behind. It wasn't a complete, unconditional forgiveness. It wasn't a, it's all okay, let's pretend nothing happened. It was a door left ajar, a possibility, a chance. It was the most I could offer at that moment. She nodded, understanding. Silent tears ran down her wrinkled face, but she didn't make a sound. She didn't try to move me with sobs or lamentations. She just let the tears fall. Silent witnesses to a deep regret, to a resigned acceptance of the consequences of her choices. "Can I come again?" she finally asked. "Another day?" "You can," I answered simply. And so began a slow, cautious process of reconnection. It wasn't reconciliation yet. It was more like two strangers getting to know each other, learning to trust each other again, taking small steps toward an unknown territory. Charlotte started coming once a week. She would sit on the porch with me. A few months into her weekly visits, Charlotte saw me struggling to repair one of the old fishing nets we used for demonstrations. She sat down wordlessly, and using the skills I had taught her as a little girl, began to mend it with quiet efficiency. She never asked to be a part of the project, but she started showing up on lesson days. She wouldn't teach, she wouldn't speak to the group, but she would stay in the background, making sure the children had water, helping patch up a scraped knee, or simply picking up trash left on the beach. Her penance was paid in small, silent acts of service. She wasn't trying to reclaim her place as my daughter. She was earning her place as a member of the community I had built. Sometimes we would talk, sometimes we would just be silent, looking at the river. With time, she started helping me with small tasks. She'd tidy up the cabin, prepare lunch, go to the market to buy what I needed. One day, she brought an album of old photographs. Photos of her as a child, photos of us together, photos of Walter. We spent the whole afternoon looking through those memories, recalling stories, reconstructing a common narrative that had been so abruptly interrupted. Little by little, Charlotte also started getting involved in the cooperatives project, at first just as an observer, then as a volunteer. She would help organize events, prepare the educational materials, serve the parents. She wasn't a central part of the project. That space was already occupied by people who had been by my side during the most difficult times, who had helped build everything from the beginning. But she was a discreet, useful, constant presence. The children called her the River Grandma's daughter, and she seemed to like that, as if it were an honorable title, a new identity she could assume. Leaving behind the woman she had been, the one who had conspired against her own mother. We never lived together again. We never fully regained the relationship we had before. There was a space between us, an emotional distance that might never completely disappear, but we found a way to coexist, to build something new from the ruins of what had been destroyed. The forgiveness came little by little, in small doses, not as a big, dramatic moment of absolution. It came in the sharing of a meal, in the exchange of an understanding look, in a hand extended to help the other get up. It came not as forgetting. I never forgot what happened on that boat, but as an acceptance that the past cannot be changed, only integrated in some way into the present and the future. Meanwhile, the Cooperatives project continued to flourish. What had started as a local initiative, focused only on the children of Lake Havasu City, now served young people from all over Lake Havasu, from neighboring towns, even from other states who came specifically to learn from us. We developed educational materials that were distributed in schools throughout the region. We produced videos, documentaries, pamphlets. We trained dozens of instructors who took our methodology to their own communities. We created a model that was being replicated in other states, adapted for different coastal realities. The legacy that was being built went far beyond my person, my individual story. It was a collective effort, a work in constant evolution that would continue long after I was no longer here. That certainty brought me a deep peace. To know that the knowledge I had received from my father, which I had perfected over decades on the river, which had almost died with me on that fateful day, was now safe, preserved, being passed on to new generations. The stories I told about storms faced, about giant fish caught, about wrecks witnessed, and yes, about the betrayal and survival circulated through the community, gained a life of their own, transformed into legends, into teachings, into inspiration. The old woman who beat the river was no longer just a nickname, but almost a mythical title. The children looked at me with a mixture of affection and reverence, as if I were a character from an adventure book, not a simple retired guide who had survived out of stubbornness and knowledge. At 83, sitting on my porch as always, watching Daniel flee in a hurry as he recognized me, I found myself reflecting on all the turns that life takes, on how paths cross, move apart, and sometimes meet again in unexpected ways. About how that terrible moment on the boat that should have been my end ended up being a new beginning. If I had died that day, as they planned, what would have been lost? Not just one life, mine, but all the lives that were touched by the project, all the children who learned to swim, all the young people who became conscious guides, all the ancestral knowledge that was preserved and passed on. What seemed to be a personal tragedy ended up generating a greater good, a collective benefit that would never have existed otherwise. Not that it justifies what they did, nothing would, but it shows how we are capable of transforming even the worst experiences into something positive if we have courage, persistence, and purpose. My philosophy of life crystallized over these years into a few simple but profound ideas. That respect is the basis of any lasting relationship with people, with the river, with life. That knowledge is a treasure that only increases when it's shared, that it's never too late to start over, to learn something new, to make a difference. And perhaps the most difficult lesson of all, that forgiveness is not weakness, but strength. It's not about forgetting what was done, but choosing not to let it define the present and the future. It's about freeing yourself from the chains of resentment, bitterness, and the thirst for revenge. It's about understanding that we are all capable of both the best and the worst, depending on the circumstances, the influences, the choices we make. Forgiving Charlotte was not easy, nor was it quick, nor was it complete. It was a process with steps forward and steps back, with days of openness and days of closing off. It was a decision I had to make repeatedly, every time I saw her, every time I remembered that day on the boat. But each small act of forgiveness was also an act of healing, not just for her, but especially for me. It was a way of saying, what you did was terrible, but it's not going to define me, it's not going to make me bitter, it's not going to stop me from living the rest of my life fully. My father's watch continued on my wrist, marking the hours, the days, the years, the same watch that had survived the capsizing that took my father, that had accompanied me during the fight for survival on that fateful day. It was more than an object. It was a symbol, a talisman, a tangible connection to the past, a physical proof of the continuity of life through the generations. Sometimes at night, when sleep was slow to come, I would lie there looking at it in the dark, listening to the constant, hypnotic tick-tock. I would think of my father, young and strong, navigating the same waters I would later navigate. I would think of myself, a girl learning the secrets of the river, then a woman making her way in a world dominated by men. Finally, an elderly woman passing on what I knew. And I would think of the children, the young people who now carried that knowledge, who adapted it for new times, who kept it alive and relevant. It was as if there was a great invisible current connecting us through time. My father, me, them. A current made not of metal but of stories, of experiences, of knowledge accumulated and shared. The river, which had been my workplace, my place of learning, my almost grave, was now my legacy. Not the physical river, of course, that belongs to everyone and no one, but the relationship with it, the understanding of it, the respect for it that was what I was leaving for future generations. When Daniel fled at the sight of me, dragging his young wife, I felt a kind of full-circle moment. He was still the same, greedy, cowardly, always looking for shortcuts, always wanting what didn't belong to him. But I had changed. I was no longer just the old woman he had tried to kill. I was a builder, an educator, a guardian of ancestral knowledge. I was someone who had transformed tragedy into triumph, betrayal into a legacy. In that moment, I felt pity for him. Pity for someone who had lived so long and learned so little, who kept running from ghosts, from consequences, from responsibilities, who would probably never know the peace that comes from being in harmony with oneself, with others, with the world around them. The revenge I didn't seek, the legal justice I didn't pursue, had been replaced by something much more powerful, much more lasting, a life well lived, with purpose, with meaning, with a positive impact on the world, a life that in some way had become bigger and richer precisely because of the attempt to take it from me. The sun was beginning to set on the horizon, painting the sky and the river with shades of orange, pink, and purple. The children were playing on the beach down below, some still swimming, others building sand castles, others just running and laughing, free and happy. Another lesson had ended, another day of shared knowledge, of lives touched, of futures shaped. I looked at the watch on my wrist, the same one that had marked so many important hours in my life. It was almost 6 p.m. Soon it would be time to gather the materials, to go back to the cabin, to rest for another day of work tomorrow. But for now, I stayed there, just watching, absorbing the beauty of the moment, the fullness of the life I had built from the ashes of betrayal. A life that, surprisingly, had become richer, more fulfilling, more meaningful than I ever imagined it would be at this advanced age. The river takes, Ellie, my father used to say, but the river also gives. You just have to know how to wait, how to receive. Wise words from a simple man, words that had guided me through storms, through losses, through betrayals, words that remain true, even after so many decades, even after so much living and learning. The river had tried to take me twice in the storm that took my father, and on the day my own daughter conspired against me. But both times it had returned me stronger, wiser, more determined to live the time I had left to the fullest. I don't know how much time I still have on this earth. The river that once held the chilling cold of betrayal now echoes with the laughter of the children I teach to swim. Looking at their faces, full of life, I see my true legacy. The pain of the past hasn't vanished, but it has been transformed, like a sharp rock worn smooth by the current. This isn't just about surviving, it's about building a new shore from the wreckage. My true story proves that even from the deepest waters, we can surface stronger, finding a new family and a new purpose. If this story touched you, please subscribe to the channel to hear more tales of resilience.